So Paizo had a Paizo Live for June of 2023 on June 30th, and I wasn't aware that it was occurring until I kind of saw the email come across. And so I looked at it this morning, which is now July 1st, and kind of watched through the whole thing. It's about 2 hours. I fully recommend watching the full Twitch stream, and I'll include a link to that in the description of this particular video. But I can give just a summary of what they covered. And there are some things in there that you might want to see for yourself or hear spoken yourself. And the other thing I really want to quickly mention is they had some commercials in there. They had some like official commercials for AP trailers. Cinescape had their own commercials that were actually pretty good. And I think all these commercials were actually done quite well and quite enjoyed them. I don't say that very much about commercials. But with that being said, my name is Don. I'm trying to be the Sly Strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. So this Paizo Live of June 2023 started with Alex Fidel and Rue Dickey hosting the particular Twitch stream. And they're doing it they said it was a new way. They're doing it kind of like as a 3 actions and a reaction. So there are 3 main segments. And for the reaction, they had a Q&A session. The 3 sessions were Logan Bonner on the Pathfinder Remaster, Luis Losa and John Compton on Highhelm and Sky King's Tomb, and then Alice Spiedel on the organized play activities. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get into the remaster project with Logan Bonner. Now, they gave us a little bit more information about the remaster. A lot of this was information that we kind of had before or might have been from different sources, but it was compiled a little bit. But there definitely is some new things here. And one thing I'm super excited about, when I get to it, I'll be sure to mention it. But it kind of got up with the first question, which if you are a new player, what are you going to love about the new remasters? And it was brought up that a lot of the stuff that was later added to the game, and now with re-releasing, they can add stuff in the core that should have been in there the whole time. Things like versatile heritages, more options in the core. It's redesigned to be easier to read and to reference because things are together, as opposed to some of it being in the core rule book and some of it being in the advanced player's guide. A better sense of how things needed to be organized as they've gone through the years with the core rule book. The GM stuff has been moved into one book, so you don't have to flip from book to book, the core rule book and the game mastery guide. And there's more story that is kind of baked into everything. And by that, they specifically mean that the story is reflected in the mechanics and the mechanics are referenced in the story. Some new options, look for new spells and revisions of existing ones. They didn't get into too many specifics, although they did mention that it is going to be fun to discover these changes. There are revisions to skills, especially crafting. It is easier, there's less setup time, formulas work differently, so you don't need a formula for every single item. You also can make an impression on multiple people with a penalty. Athletics has a new thing to do, which is a reposition, which you can reposition creatures on the battlefield, maybe laterally in different ways. And there's just a bunch of these cool little things to find all throughout the new remaster. There are new spells that were replaced due to the OGL, as well as some that were just good ideas to include. One of the ones that they brought up specifically was the Figment spell, which is an illusion cantrip, which is a more broad replacement to a general illusion cantrip. They did bring up an item, Crown of Witchcraft, which is for the witch. Which is for the witch. That's kind of funny. This came up later, and I'll go ahead and I'll add it in now. But basically what it does is it gives you another focus point once per day, as well as a few other things that you get from it, but they didn't really go into more detail on that. Let's see, what else did we have? We also had an item which is called Marvelous Miniature, a consumable which is used to create an item out of nothing. Once again, they brought up the fact that it did have better organization in the remaster. And then they showed an image, and this is the opening images for the skills chapter. It's a brand new piece of art. It shows a Witch Ranger team-up action, and what they're doing is they're trying to give the rogue some time to do her thing while in battle, so that's kind of interesting, and the art's wonderful, of course. In the GM core, there's some new options. They basically put everything into one place rather than having some in the core rulebook and some in the game mastery guide and little things sprinkled throughout various things. Before, the advice wasn't as comprehensive, but they consider this setup to be more valuable for new GMs. And here's the part that I'm super excited about is there's more guidance for how recall knowledge works. So I haven't done a specific recall knowledge guide, and I've seen a bunch of videos out there on the problems with recall knowledge, and I kind of agree with them, but they have revamped recall knowledge. So I'm really interested to see where they're going with that. A bunch of cool new magic items, and then brought up the fact that Monster Core will come out and there'll be more new stuff for the GMs in Monster Core. One of the questions that came up is how much of this change is designer and player feedback? Now, mostly it is for OGL, SRD type stuff. However, there's a fair number of areas that had feedback, and a lot of the feedback and some of the designer things they wanted to change is stuff that they should be looking for ahead and what they did not know they wanted when they originally came out with the core rule book and the game mastery guide a few years ago. And there are some new things in there like general feats and things along those lines. Now the remaster is coming in November. Rage of Elements previews it. And one of the things they said that was going to happen is there is going to be a core preview document with Rage of Elements, including a spell that is going to be in the player core, but you can use the PDF as well as Archives of Nethys in the current version. Now, this particular core preview document will be mostly obsolete when the player core comes out because, of course, the new rulebook will be fully out. But we are going to get a little preview with Rage of Elements, as well as in this core preview document, a few extra things, but they aren't specific in Rage of Elements. Now, they also showed some more art, which is this Iconics gaming picture, and it is for the GM core. And the basic premise of this is, what if you had these Iconics at your gaming table and they wanted to put the Iconics kind of in the player's position? Another big thing that came up, and this every single time I hear about the remaster, they seem to really talk about this a lot, is the edicts and anathemas and removing alignment. So the brief explanation was edicts and anathemas were in the core rule book before, but basically for deities, and alignment causes problems and is a bit reductive. So edicts and anathemas are more robust and they do add guidance. They're trying to uplift the edicts and anathema to replace the alignment. Now, it might be more mandatory for certain classes than others. They didn't specifically mention any, but if you think about it, champion, clerics, deities already had it. However, these are going to be added to the ancestries as well. Logan did give us some examples from the book and didn't tell us where they came from, like what ancestries or what deities or whatever. However, he said we should guess where they should come from, and what it was where he had his own personal edicts and his own personal anathemas. So his edicts were share knowledge, you won through pain. He brought that up specifically to the remaster. Choose and perfect an art. And then seek hedonistic thrills was his other edict, and he described that as YouTube and Doritos. The anathemas were leave an activity incomplete or a promise incomplete, and engage in bigoted behavior. And Logan did have a spoiler, and there was a new spell, and I'll go ahead and include an image of that up here, which is Divine Immolation. It shows off the reformat. They wanted to highlight the fact that this looks like other actions now. Remove the spell components. This does show the difference between spirit damage versus alignment damage, as well as shows off the sanctified trait that it can make it holy when you cast it. From there, we went into a break and then came back on with Highhelm with Luis Losa and John Compton. So let's go ahead and get into that. The next segment was Highhelm and Sky King's Tomb, which is coming out next month. But Highhelm, which I was super fortunate to get at my local game store just the other day, that is already out. So there aren't too many spoilers for Highhelm because, once again, it exists. But did go into Highhelm a little bit, mainly Luis, and it was basically talked about the question was the high-level process on why they chose dwarves in Highhelm for a new Lost Omens book. And basically because Highhelm's is unique, you have a city like Absalom and you can do it kind of 2D, overhead view, and there's the city. Well, Highhelm is 4 or arguably 5 different levels. And in this particular book, they have a map that comes with it, which I can kind of show you a little bit. But it has a little map in the back, and it basically has, let's see what I can show reasonably. Basically, I'll do a little bit, kind of like a little bit, each level has its own map. And so you get that in the Highhelm book. Now, Luis said he's mainly a halfling guy, but really got into dwarves and wanted to give them some love. So they fleshed out dwarves and their settings. How are dwarves different in Galarian? A lot is familiar, you know, the grumpiness, the living underground, but they expand it to the nth degree, or they try to say, well, these are typical things, but, and basically they wanted to go into what the differences are between Galarian dwarves and other dwarves. And the big thing that really goes into Highhelm, which I haven't had too much of a chance to go through yet, but I really want to, is that the clans are very important, and this book goes all in on the clans, its importance to dwarves, how a dwarf gets a clan dagger at birth, how they're part of that clan, they can leave the clan and join other clans. Each one has a unique history and a unique focus that they kind of work on. So the clans are a kind of an interesting part. And then Galarian dwarves have a unique history in that they all started out underground, and then there was the quest for Sky, where they received a message from Torag, which is go find the sky and to find a whole new world. And one thing that was brought up here is that until this point, dwarves didn't know what the sky was. They'd never seen it. Now, one of the questions was asked was, out of all the clans in the Highhelm, which one Luis would be? Luis said he would be Clan Vanderhall. They're the general laborers, kind of the Teamster-ish type people. Lots of camaraderie. They're all over the city. Now, there are a dozen clans that are the major clans. There are a ton of minor clans, but there are 12 major clans, and each has a major focus. Each has their own influence and their own major role within the city. And you can be from any of these clans, as they are so big. So just because you're starting out doesn't mean that it's going to be hard to say that you're from this major clan, because there's so many of them. So you can create a new character and fit into these clans. And you can use that as to maybe what is expected of you as a dwarf in Highhelm. You can be clanless, and you can also leave clans and join other clans. And there's processes for that, which is covered in the Highhelm book. Now, talking a little bit about the quest for Sky and the Sky King's Tomb with John Compton, and what is interesting about it, first level through 10th level, 3 volumes. There's a lot of history and lore in the upper levels of the Darklands. As you continue, there's more and more, and you go deeper and deeper, dangerous and alien territory. You start out first level, discovering who you are and the lore, and you uncover a bunch of secret little nuggets of Dwarven history to follow up on and explore, but it is an underground focused adventure. And then a good question came up, which is, why should this be the first AP to play? Once again, it starts level 1 through level 10. And he brought up that doing this adventure is they thought about how they're getting people invested in the story, the world, and the characters. This particular AP has a period of self-discovery. The first volume takes place in Highhelm itself. It's kind of sandbox structured or toy box structured were the two ways that they described it. Especially the first chapter of the AP, there's different encounter types, different experiences, and different obstacles, and it allows you to find your feet, and it's a toy box to figure stuff out. Now, map of the city is included. There's 4 or 5 maps, depending on how you look at it. Basically, the 4 levels are King's Crown, King's Heart, Stone Breach, and the Depths. Depending on how you look at it, then there's the Darklands, which might be the 5th. They brought up the fact that it is a poster form from the Highhelm book, which I kind of showed right here. And so much in Highhelm that there are places that are going to be on these maps that they don't have full entries in the Highhelm. So it'll be in the APs, it allows them to do bigger adventures, or it allows people to come up with their own stories for some of these areas. Now, we do have some art from the Sky King Tomb. It is from the first volume, which is a safe, fortified city, but part of the danger is inside the city as well. Some doors are up to nefarious things or misguided acts. And image shows you Jarell, one of the 4 iconic, who is a swashbuckler. Now, John was asked about Sky King's Tomb, if there are any particular encounters or settings that he wanted to talk about. And so John went a little bit into encounters and adventure design, how they try to have hooks and locations in Highhelm, but that you are able to riff or explore on. There's tunnel systems and off the grid areas. So encounter design, they wanted to make sure that there were low map adventuring. And what that means is it's adventuring and there's narratives to it. There's a longer segment called the Black Noon Gauntlet. The Black Noon thieves will put coins into a labyrinth in the Black Noon Gauntlet. And then the guild will be willing to interview you if you can go into the labyrinth, get a coin, and bring it out. Now, you are not necessarily going to be joining the guild, but you will be around someone else who is. John Compton's turn for a spoiler is that basically that there are some side events within the AP showing off the game of Basilisk in the Sky King's Tomb. It was talked about in Lost Omens Travel Guide, but you have an opportunity to step in at the last minute. Also, the second one was there's a Stickleberry Festival where you can be crowned the Stickleberry Sovereign if you win a pieing contest. So that's kind of funny. And then Luis's spoiler, still Dwarven related from the core rule book. He did bring up a Dwarven ancestry feat, and it was a 13th level feat called March the Mines. And basically, using those two actions, you can gain a burrow speed temporarily, and you can stride or burrow twice. And what it does, it allows you to bring someone with you. So you can basically dig while carrying someone with you for 2 actions. And you both will end up on the other side when you finish. From there, we went into a break, and then we are going to get into organized play. So Alex Speedell came back on talking about organized play and Pathfinder Society and Starfinder Society. Pathfinder Society, talking about some of the scenarios that are going to be coming out. 415 Inglorious Battle. It's levels 9 through 12, and it's already out as of a few days ago. Orcs Burning Sunhold. It's going to be great for lore heads for Pathfinder. Then 2 that are coming out next month. One is 416, which is Dasalane's Academy First Great Prank War. It's for levels 3 through 6, and it's Academy for kids in Pathfinder Society. So the parents go out and they can drop their kids off at this academy or daycare. So it's a daycare for adventurers, basically. It is exam time, and this prank war allows the kids to blow off some steam. There are fae involved. And then there was 417, which is Trapping the Hag's Claw. It's for levels 7 through 10. This is the conclusion to Year of Boundless Wonder, where you face off with the hag, Night Hag Aspen, and her schemes. At Gen Con in August, there will be a Pathfinder special, which is $4.99, called Blessings of the Forest. Everyone will be playing that at the con, and you're basically heading to Keonan to face off against demons. And then we talked a little bit about Season 5, which is going to be called The Year of Unfettered Exploration. It will be launched at Gen Con. Scenario 5-01, Year of Unfettered Exploration, level 1 through 4. It's basically you are taking a VIP through the maze of the open road. And then Scenario 5-02, which is going to be for levels 3 through 6, called The Blackwood Lost. Planar and elemental shenanigans at a dig site. This will be a good one if you're a fan of Rage of Elements and a kineticist. And then we moved into Starfinder Society. At Gen Con, they will be doing $5.99 Battle of the Bulwark, which was already run at PaizoCon, but it is repeatable, and that's the one they're going to be playing at Gen Con. Then we talked about the first speaker election season. The Starfinder Society is led by the first speaker, and they decide the goals and the missions of the society. Now, I'm not going to go too far into these candidates because there is a whole blog post, and I'll link that here as well as in the description for the video. And I'm going to mispronounce these horribly, so please excuse me. But it is Nikiti Lampadefros, and her main focus is to explore magical phenomenon, Kasmerg's Absurdity, which is a region of space where navigation equipment and some electronic equipment things just don't work. Another one is Aurora Everbright, halfling who is big on putting the star in Starfinder and really wants to focus on good deeds and exploits and ensuring everybody knows about them. Dr. Heldon Savale, who is a scientist and naturalist, and he wants to undertake a grand scientific expedition exploring and cataloging the universe and providing medicines through these explorations. And then there's Sarmak, who's peaceful. He's really interested in the mega structures of the universe, these huge structures in universe that are vacant, delving and finding cool stuff from the past in these things. There was the Abalone, and find out what's went on with them and why did they disappear. Now, how this works is actual player characters were submitted, and they went through all the player characters and kind of came across the ones that had the best story potential. They'll be featured in an adventure in Gen Con, and you will be able to vote for the candidates after Gen Con. And I'll go ahead and include a link here as well as in the description, but you won't be able to vote till after Gen Con. And Alex Bedell wrote the scenario where you meet the candidates, and each will have a unique mission. One of the questions that came up was, will the former first speaker still be present? Well, he's now retired, but the original player can now play with them again. While they were the first speaker for the past 4 years or so, they were unable to be played, but now they'll be able to play with them again. Now, also want to emphasize the fact that the votes will affect Starfinder Society massively by guiding the Starfinder missions and meta plot. The temperament of the candidates will also affect the temperament of the missions. It could be big and flashy, or it could be speaking in riddles, depending on who is voted in. And another question is why this is a good time to get into Starfinder Society. And it is because it's a period of transition. It's a good time to get involved. Major missions are completed and new missions are coming in. So you're not bogged down by past lore and storylines, and you're starting out with a new low-level scenario. Alex did have some spoilers for the elections. They wanted to make it easier to advertise what is going on. So there are campaign posters, and they're available now to download. And I'll go ahead and show a picture of those, but they are pretty fantastic. Actually, I like them quite a bit. And then there was a Twitter poll of which of the 4 missions if people want to know about, and the one who won was Dr. Heldens. So in 606, he's going to send the player characters on a journey to another planet to get soil, plant, and fungus samples in order to help create medicine for an illness that miners have on Tosin 5. Now with that, we ended kind of the organized play section, and we went into the reaction, which is a Q&A section. So let's go ahead and get into that. Now they had a QA session where they brought everybody back in, and so we'll go ahead and just start with the questions. So for new GM in training, how do you get up to speed on the lore in Galarian? For Luis, brought up the fact that there's a Lost Omens world guide that is the way to get up to speed with basically the whole world. Logan brought up pathfinderwiki.com, and just click on articles and you can kind of get into a click hole and just eventually go through a bunch of things and get nuggets and trivia all over the place. John also brought up the fact that there is a chapter in the core rulebook called Lost Omens, which is a very condensed view of the lore of Galarian. Another question came up with the alignment going away. How do you determine if a deity gives holy or unholy? Logan brought up that it's in the deity stat block, whether it requires a certain one or no direction at all. Luis kind of made a joke and said you figure it out via vibes, but divine sanctification line is in the stat block. And an example was Iomade will say that you must take holy. Serene will guide you to take holy, but not required. Nethys says choose whatever you want. Dorgabur says you can choose unholy, where Asmodeus will say you must choose unholy, and Pharasma will say you don't get any of it. A question for Alex that was a little bit humorous was, do former first speakers get Secret Service? Probably some level of protection, but to be the first speaker, you have to be pretty high level. So they would only get as much as they want. And then a joke was brought up that plot armor is what they get. John Compton, a question for him was who the iconic party is for Sky King's tomb. It was pretty fast, but Nalmakuk is a gunslinger, Harsk Ranger, Jorel Swashbuckler, and Sussler, which is a magus. And how they picked it was they kind of figured out who's featured on either side of it so they don't repeat characters too much, which iconics have part of an identity that fit into the AP, as well as a little bit of thought to party balance. And they also want who has not had a lot of screen time. If there's a new iconic, they'd like to include them if they can. Or if someone hasn't been brought up in a long time, they'd like to include them as well. The joke about why can't we have a whole Fumbus party? And they said it happens sometimes. Question was brought up about Dongan, Hold, Dwarven stuff. And Luis answered that those dwarves don't necessarily live in Highhelm, so they're not necessarily included in the Highhelm book. However, Nuggenhold was done in Impossible Lands, as well as a bit in Outlaws of Alskanar. But in the short term, there's nothing really planned to do more with them. Kind of humorous question. Will there be official pies for the society contest on sale? Those stickleberry pies, and what type of pies everybody was. A lot of half-hearted answers there, so I'm not necessarily going to go into that too much. But then there was a question for Logan: are the monster creation guideline in the GM core or monster core? And he answered it was in the GM core. However, NPCs will not be in the GM core. They wanted spoilers for Kineticist. Luis didn't have a good one for Kineticist, but he did bring up one for one of Rage of Elements, which is there are magic items focusing on mixing of elements. There's a new vehicle that is there to help you traverse the planes, a sailing ship that'll keep you safe if you are in it but not outside of it. It does have an emergency warp function, a drive that works once until you can get the drive fixed again. Something was brought up about the conflict between dwarves and orcs and how dwarves are such a focus right now. So John kind of came up with whether there's any reconciliation or change in that relationship. And there is some setting background. The dwarves were the protagonists with a quest for Sky that kind of kicked into the door of the orcs. But they want to revisit how the schism can be healed and revisit how they can play together. And Sky King's Tomb does have the potential to explore that conflict. Question that came up for Logan was the optional rules in the GM guide, and have they been revisited? He was basically saying not all of them, and not all of them have been added. Some of the ones that did make it to GM core was proficiency without level, free archetype, level 0, automatic bonus progression. However, some of them, like deep backgrounds, didn't make it because they take up a lot of space and hardly anyone ever uses them. There was a question for Alex on 416, the prank war, whether your own characters get caught up as kids or it's the iconics as kids. And no, you basically play your own characters with all your own abilities. Logan did come up with a tease for Kineticist, composite impulses. Some of the ones he brought up was Living Bonfire, which is a wood and fire mix. And basically what it is you chuck burning logs out of a bonfire. Lightning Rod, which is metal and air, which you shoot a metal rod at someone and then shock them with it. And brought up the fact that there is room to play a whole party of Kineticists, but there's so much variation that you could have each of them play a different role in the party. Good question was brought up was, do you foresee any changes in past APs or revisiting them to update to the remaster? New ones, obviously, and ones that are in transition, like started before the remaster and are continuing after. There'll be some transition between those. For older ones, there is going to be some documentation for giving guidance so that they can be updated by the GMs themselves. But unless there is like a hardcover remaster that's put out for these APs, generally, no, they're not going to revisit the old APs. There was another Logan spoiler because everybody was interested in the witch stuff. So the Crown of Witchcraft, once again, he brought up the fact here that you get a focus point out of it once per day. And also more about witches is that there's a clearer story and focus on familiars. These familiars do stuff that other familiars don't, and how to interact with your patron and closer ties you have with your patron. There's more space for lessons and more of the story angle rather than the mechanical angle of your relationship with your patron. And every patron gives a unique ability, and familiars get more abilities, and your familiar gets a unique ability based on what your patron is. And the other one was how leveling up is working in Sky King's Tomb, because it is different. And not necessarily different as in we've never seen it before, just different in that most of the other APs balance the amount of combat you have and obstacles and traps and things you overcome to earn XP in order to make sure you're leveling at a different rate or at a correct rate. Sky King's Tomb uses milestone leveling, so they weren't tied to ensuring that you need to complete X number of battles and go over X number of obstacles and defeat X level of traps in order to gain XP. Now it is milestone, so the story isn't dependent on your mechanical interaction with the world. It can be narrative. The way they put it, and it's a good way I think, is the story that needs to be told rather than additional combats to fill out the XP. Now, that is the summary of the Paizo Live for June 2023. I'll be sure to keep an eye out these in the future. I didn't see it come up on the community blog at all, and until I actually saw the notification for it, actually after it had already started, I didn't even know what was going on. So Sorry, the summary is about a day late. I would have tried to get this out today if I could have. But I do hope you like the summary. Once again, please go watch the entire Twitch stream. I'll include the link. It's all pretty good. There's a lot more comedy. There's a lot more lightheartedness. And there's a lot more depth. And plus, also watch the commercials. They're actually pretty good. But I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that notification bell. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.